in the Margolis study was that this was not a common experience for women, while it was described as a very common experience for male computer science students. So that's cool.
Just now you mentioned differences. You alluded to gender differences, and more specifically, where it seemed you were indicating that, at least based on the study, that men look at technology as an end in of itself, whereas women look at technology as sort of a means to an end?
Yeah, that was what was found.
Okay, if that difference isn't biological, and I think I agree that it isn't, do you have any idea how that would get socialized?
I think it has to do a lot with the nurturing socialization that women go through, as opposed to the sort of the technical socialization that men go through. I hate to always rely on the Carnegie Mellon study, but it is a really awesome study, and I would heavily suggest that anybody interested in this idea read up on it. It's actually a really good read, the book that was published out of the study. But one of the things that they talked about was the idea of the computer in the boys' room. And even in my personal experience growing up, I did not have a computer in my room. I only got my own computer when I left for university. Whereas, and even within my family, as my little brother has grown up, he's got his own computer now. And I don't mean that like my parents are sexist or anything, but this is a fairly common experience for people, for young men and young women. I think that that's going to be less true going forward, as I don't know. I think people in the States use AIM, like kids in the States use AIM, whereas in Canada, like basically everybody under 15 is on MSN, like as soon as they get home from school, and a lot of kids have their own computers from a fairly low socioeconomic strata up, and it is being used increasingly as a social tool by kids of both genders, and I think that that's actually going to have a really positive impact going forward in terms of the involvement of men of women in computer science as a field. So, does that answer your question, I think?
There was a 2001 conference at Carnegie Mellon called Girls, Women in Technology, and the point was asserted that there aren't enough cool games for young girls, and that might have something to do with the problem.
I think that that's very true, and I mean, if you think of what the games that have been produced traditionally for girls have been, there was a lot of like pet simulators, and there were like Barbie games, and
Purple Moon?
Yeah, and they all kind of sucked. Whereas even me growing up, one of the things that got me a lot into computers was like the old LucasArts adventure games. These are games that are not like first-person shooters. I don't really like first-person shooters. Once in a while I like to go out and like shoot lots of people on a computer, but most of the time I want to play something with a really good storyline. And I think that the decline in the adventure game industry, somebody should do a study and see if the decline in the adventure game industry has any correlation to the decline in women in computer science, because there actually has been a decline, and that's one of the overall, in the 90s and 2000s, there has been a decline in women. Since I think 1988 was the peak of women's enrollment in computer science in the States. And it's been downhill since then, other than at Carnegie Mellon. So.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
Making the assumption that it's not, and there's no biological basis. We'll let, using me as an example, when I was 6 years old, my father, brought home a computer, put it in the living room, and, I said, oh, hey, teach me how to program. So, I practically taught myself how to program on it. Now, my sister, that was the year she was born. So, she grew up having, the computer in the living room, but she never showed any interest in it. So, I'm a programmer. My brother's job is, he programs for a living, and, my sister's never shown any interest in it except, email.
Yeah.
So, do you think that there are differences in how my brother and I were parented versus my sister, or just dumb luck, or
I think that it's a little bit of luck. It's a little bit of it's a lot of parenting, and it's a lot of more general socialization. There's been a lot of research into the way that gender roles like career gender roles in the media impacts kids and imprinting on kids as to what kind of roles they're going to choose for themselves to go into to study in school and to go into as a career. And there's no one thing, even if it was partly biological, there's all these different factors that come into play in terms of career choices and choices of interest. So actually, sort of as a follow-up to that, one of the things that I found the most interesting out of this Carnegie Mellon study was the idea that interest is deeply tied to confidence in a subject. And the chapter on it was actually called The Nexus of Confidence and Interest. And the idea that as you become more confident in a particular discipline, a particular area of study, you become more interested in it, which I think is pretty obvious to anybody, that you're good at something, so you're going to become more interested in it. But the flip side of that is things that break your confidence in a subject make you lose interest in it, which seems kind of counterintuitive. Why would my not feeling good about coding make me think that I'm not interested in it? But if I'm feeling like I'm really struggling, I can't get Linux installed on my laptop, nothing's working, well, maybe it's just not the right thing for me to be doing. Maybe I should, go back to Windows and give up on the whole open source thing. There's this really deeply tied association between confidence and interest, and because of things like poor teaching negatively affecting women more than men, and therefore destroying their confidence, they have a much higher tendency to then become disinterested, which is really just not confident.
So I also help run a Linux users group, and I see, particularly at InstallFest, what will happen is a woman will come in with her laptop or her desktop, and all of a sudden there's a swarm of guys who want to jump in there and be the hero.
I'll help you. Yeah, and take the keyboard away. And I think that's the big key for teaching. Well, it's the key for teaching anybody about computer stuff is to not be in the driver's seat. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the agile programming philosophy, but one of the things heavily involved in that is the idea of pair programming. And in pair programming, generally speaking, the person who is less experienced is supposed to be driving, i.e. at the keyboard. And I think that applies equally well for stuff like InstallFest, any sort of computer science teaching. It's really, really hard to learn looking over somebody's shoulder. And I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of trying to learn by looking over somebody's shoulder, but it's intensely frustrating. So that's a really good point.
What about like the junior high school level? What kind of changes can be made there to encourage women to get more technical fields?
Well, they found that a number of studies have been done into not secondary, but so primary teaching methodologies and the impact on career choices and educational choices for women. And even they found that even teachers who think that they're really good about gender in the classroom, when they actually study the numbers of times that they call on male students versus calling on female students, there'll be like this really dramatic disproportion, like this really dramatic skew towards male students, in particular in science and math and computer science classrooms. And so having a real consciousness of how often you're calling on students of different genders, even if there's, the really enthusiastic couple of guys that sit in the front row and ask lots of questions, and sometimes you need to consciously call on the people who are less maybe kind of meek in the background and saying, I might know this answer, but I'm not going to be really confident about it, and encouraging confidence through mentoring and through active questioning. So those are a couple of things that have been shown to be really effective.
There have been a couple studies recently that are starting to look at women in gaming and how there are all of these games that they say, oh, we're trying to encourage women. We think that women will really like this. Here's a game for women. Look, your character can run around in a bikini. And I was wondering if you see that sort of happening a little bit more broadly. We're really trying to do this for you. We have absolutely no idea.
The Lara Crofts of the Lara Croft problem, right? Yeah. Sure, she's this awesome, empowering female character. She just happens to have boobs that are like balloons, and So maybe women aren't going to be so comfortable playing with that, and it is really a catch-22 in terms of, well, maybe not a catch-22. It is a problem in trying to advance these role models, but then them not really being very positive role models, and I don't really know what the solution to that is. Other than, you know, keep trying kind of thing. I guess that's all we can really hope for. Yeah.
Have you found commonalities with yourself and other women in the computing field that have helped all of you, you know, get through the impediments for being involved in that?
Well, honestly, I think the biggest thing for me is I wish that I'd read this Carnegie Mellon study before I dropped out of physics, because the whole idea of confidence being directly tied to interest was my exact experience with second-year quantum mechanics and having a teacher who didn't speak English. And I had this teacher who was very well-intentioned, but I just could not understand a word he was saying. And not having the confidence to go out and ask people for a lot of help on stuff that I wasn't getting. And there were just all of these different factors, which were like the classical factors of women dropping out of technical fields. And they all happened to me in second year. And if I had known about that going in, I think that would have been really empowering and probably would have allowed me to ride through it. And I think that finding that there are these same factors that discourage women from participating in these varied fields, physics, computer science, and mathematics, I think that knowing some of those things going in would be really powerful for women participating in these fields.
I think that the interest and confidence nexus is sort of tied more broadly to the issue of mentoring, and that women who see other women in the field are more likely to approach them and ask them questions to avoid the, ooh, there's a girl, let's all like take a people.
I think that's really true. It's a network effect in the same way as the whole like adding one developer to the development team just makes it more complicated. Adding one woman to the computer science faculty, to the physics faculty. At the University of Toronto, which was my home institution, there were 3 female physics profs out of like a faculty of about 40, which was actually pretty high in Canada. So it was kind of sad, and there wasn't that mentoring and support network. And having that in place, every single woman who joins this community who starts actively participating encourages other women to participate. So.
Well, do you know how this compares to other cultures where you know, women are, you know, have different social roles and so forth? Like, you know, say, you know, some countries where, you know, women are allowed to, you know, combat in the military and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know the statistics a bit better in this case in the physics community, but there's a number of countries in the world, like in Canada at least, the number of physics postgrads, like physics postdocs, so people who have gone through all the way to a PhD program, is something like 4%. And basically in undergrad there'll be 40%, in masters there'll be like 30%. There's this idea of the leaky pipeline. At each level of academic achievement, there are fewer and fewer women involved in physics. The difference with Canada versus a country, for whatever reason, politics aside, Iran has something like 60% of their physicists are women. And I don't know what the reason behind that is, but what that really suggests is this isn't a biological thing, this is a cultural thing. Because if a country like Iran can have 60% of their physicists be women, there's something else going on culturally. And I think that, I'm sure that the statistics are, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I'm sure that if somebody were to look into the statistics for computer science participation across cultures, there would be dramatic differences between countries. Yeah. Cool. Did I see a hand over there? No.
What can computer groups like Lugs and stuff do outside the high schools to encourage women participation?
I think with Lugs, I mean, at least from my personal experience, a lot of what needs to happen at Lugs is a matter of self-policing. I talked a little bit about bad behavior being discouraging for women in terms of like harassment and the whole idea of, you know, getting sort of swarmed when you show up. There are a couple of people at the Toronto Lug who actually have made me so uncomfortable that I've stopped going. One of the guys there actively talks, like, he heckles other presenters when they're talking, and people make jokes while he's heckling about his like BDSM fetish. And it's funny, and like I kind of brush it off, but that makes a lot of people actively